Hello, I'm John Kraus, and I'm responsible for corporate governance, compliance, and ethics here at Heinz globally. I've met many of you in my travels around the world at Heinz, and there's still many more that I haven't met. So I'd like to take a little bit of your time today to talk about an issue that's very important to us in the ethics department here at Heinz. And that is, why is ethics so important to businesses, and what are the main ethics and compliance objectives here at Heinz? Before beginning, ask yourself this question. What are the main objectives of business? I think there are three. First, create and sell a product or a service. Second, do it at a profit for your shareholders. And third, do it in a way that's sustainable, a way that will last a long time. Now, the first of these three factors, making the product and selling it at a profit, are easy to understand. But what about this third element, this issue of sustainability? I think it has three main components. First, environmentally sustainable. Second, sustainable from a quality or health perspective. And third, sustainable from the perspective of acting with integrity. History has shown us that companies that fail to act with integrity falter at some point because of their unscrupulous business practices. There are plenty of examples of companies who have destroyed themselves because they were not ethically sustainable. The most famous example is Enron, the Texas energy company that was guilty of violating its own ethics policies. What caused Enron's collapse? Accounting fraud, such as reporting over $1 billion of false income, hiding debts, and manipulating cash flow, especially at year-end. Once Enron started disclosing its issues, the end came fast. It disclosed on November 8, 2001, that it would restate 4 years of earnings, and by December 2nd, it was bankrupt. Its wrongdoing resulted in the company imploding, with all of its employees losing their jobs and many their retirement benefits, which had been tied up in Enron shares. When Enron went bankrupt in 2001, we thought business learned a great lesson. However, there was a string of ethical lapses after Enron, such as Tyco, where CEO Dennis Kozlowski used the U.S. company as his personal piggy bank to fund purchases of artwork and an $18 million Manhattan apartment, and WorldCom, where CEO Bernie Evers overstated revenue by some $55 billion. However, these violations were not just confined to the United States. For example, the Italian dairy giant Parmalat overstated its balance sheet by $5 billion and used offshore companies to paper over $17 billion of debt. While in China, the China Construction Bank suffered the government execution of 4 employees for bank fraud. You could say this unethical behavior, which began with Enron at the beginning of the decade, culminated at the end of the decade in the collapse of the U.S. financial markets, where companies such as Lehman Brothers went bankrupt for failure to follow their own business principles. In addition, thousands of individual investors lost their life savings due to the Ponzi schemes of Bernie Madoff and Alan Stanford. Each one of these provides students of ethics with great examples of how companies and individuals have destroyed their businesses and their reputations by their failure to act ethically. In contrast, at Heinz, we are striving to conduct business with integrity since our founder, Henry J. Heinz, began the company back in 1869. And to be successful at that, each one of us has to focus every day on acting ethically and with integrity. To appreciate that culture of integrity, I think it is very useful to understand the way our founder, Henry Heinz, operated, and to analyze the strong foundation of ethical business practices that he laid for this company. And I am convinced that his legacy has been a tremendous help in allowing us to prosper for almost a century and a half. But now it's up to us, the current managers and employees of Heinz, to carry the torch, to keep the company on the right track by living every day by the business principles laid down by our founder, Henry Heinz. What was it that Henry Heinz did in starting the company that has set us on the right path? Through his own actions, he created a culture of trying to do the right thing. He was a man who was very devoted to his principles, an independent thinker, a man who did many things that were unheard of at the time, such as providing unique new employee benefits such as medical care with doctors, nurses, and dentists at the factory, working hard to pass the Pure Food and Drug Act to begin regulating the quality of processed food in the United States, and treating suppliers, customers, and consumers ethically. We have discussed why ethics and compliance is so important to sustaining and running a business. And we reviewed a little history of the ethical business practices of our founder, Henry J. Heinz, and how it helped to build a great foundation for the business. Now let's review some of the basic and fundamental ethics and compliance principles of the company. We refer to them as the 5 guideposts of ethics and compliance, and they are the Global Code of Conduct, the corporate policies, our global operating principles, our supplier guiding principles, and the ethics and compliance hotline. Let me briefly describe the 5 guideposts. The first is the Global Code of Conduct, a 20-page document which outlines the conduct we expect of all Heinz employees. It focuses on 5 categories of stakeholders, which are ourselves and our fellow employees, our consumers and customers, our shareholders, our suppliers and competitors, and our communities. I'd like to give you an example, a short story that I've heard recently about how our employees use the Code of Conduct, our first guidepost, in thinking through an issue. They were negotiating the sale of products to a foreign government, and they had worked on this deal for a couple weeks, and the day before they were supposed to fly to this other country to conclude the deal, they received a telephone call from the fellow they'd been working with. And this fellow said, "We're all set to go. When you get here, I'd really like for you to have dinner with my boss. He's the person who will be signing the contract. And I recommend to create the relationship that you give him a gift of, say, $500 or $600. And our fellows said, "Boy, wait a minute, I can't pay $500 or $600 to a government official to sign a contract with us." And the fellow said, "Well, in that case, how about a nice suit and a new pair of shoes?" And they said, no, you don't understand. We can't make any kind of a payment to your boss in order to get him to sign the contract. And the fellow said, "Well, in that case, how about just a nice set of new golf clubs?" And they said, no, you don't understand. We cannot make any payment to anybody in order to get them to sign a contract with us. Well, this went back and forth a few more times, and finally our employees actually had to walk away from this contract, something they had worked a couple weeks on getting negotiated, and it was a shame, but they were able to identify the issue. They knew how to do the right thing. They followed the Code of Conduct. The second guidepost are our corporate policies, of which there are 70 financial policies and 71 non-financial policies. The non-financial policies include policies such as insider trading, antitrust, conflict of interest, quality, environmental, safety, risk, and anti-bribery. Now, 141 corporate policies is a lot of policies, I realize, but my key message for you here is to simply take a look at the index so you understand an overview of what policies there are, and then look at the policies that apply to your substantive area of practice. Now, moving on to the third guidepost, our global operating principles. This is simply a public statement to the world of the principles that we stand for here at Heinz. Principles such as appropriate conditions of employment, occupational health and safety, security, good citizenship, and strong commitment to the environment. The fourth guidepost, our supplier guiding principles, are very similar to our global operating principles, but they apply exclusively to our suppliers. We recognize that our supply chain is much broader than just the employees at Heinz, and we need all those global suppliers to conform to the Heinz ethical principles. The fifth and final guidepost is the Ethics and Compliance Hotline, probably the best known of the 5 guideposts. The hotline may be used 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It's a phone or web-based tool. It can be completely anonymous. You're not required to leave your name. And it's run by a third party in Atlanta, Georgia. Calls do not come into World Headquarters in Pittsburgh. And finally, consistent with our corporate policy, no retaliation is allowed. Now let me give you a few details about the actual operation of the hotline. There were 108 calls to the hotline in fiscal year 11. 89 calls were from North America, 10 were from Asia Pacific, 8 were from Europe, and only 1 call from the rest of the world. The hotline is a great preventative tool and can provide us an early warning signal with respect to future potential problems. Now, the type of calls that we receive on the hotline are what I would call primarily human relationship types of calls, conflicts between a boss and a subordinate or between coworkers. But a very important minority of the calls deal with significant issues such as quality, payroll fraud, misuse of social media, nepotism, and retaliation. The hotline serves the company well by providing a direct communication link for all employees. Well, that completes my short review of why ethics and compliance is so important to multinationals like Heinz, and the overview of the 5 guideposts of ethics and compliance. I hope you found it helpful. Thanks for listening, and have a great year at Heinz.